So guys, thank you all for being here. I titled this panel, Adapt or Die. Discuss.
So that's not anything new, is it?
No.
I mean, if you just look at the media space, the general media space, right? Late 80s, we would have been talking about CompuServe. A few years later, we would have been talking about Prodigy. A few years later, we'd be talking about AOL, then Yahoo, right? Google sort of has shown a bit of resilience and adaptive ability. MySpace, not so much. So it is adapt or die.
Yeah, look, if you think about change just beyond media, beyond marketing, beyond companies, it's happening all around us, right? So we talk about it in terms of technology and we see accelerating change there. We got that. But institutions are also changing. If you look at just the Fortune 500 companies, there's a study back in the 1960s, Fortune 500 companies, its average lifespan was about 60 years. Fast forward to 2020, it's less than 20 years. And what's driving that change are the new emerging companies that are operating in a fundamentally different way. And so the companies that adapt survive, the ones that don't go away. And it's just not, it goes beyond companies and institutions. Look at consumer behavior, the way they're grouping together. That's changed. You know, the way that people receive and share information, that's changed. So if everything is changing at an accelerating rate, you know, how do we think that marketing, branding, media can stand still? That's why you either adapt or die, because everything else is adapting or dying.
And just to continue that, because I think at any of our companies, which are all very, very big companies, when I was thinking about the title of this panel, which I thought was a little negative, adapt or die, I thought about that it really, in particular to companies like ours that we represent, it's much more about innovate or die. And innovate, you know, a little more positive. But because of the technology acceleration in our businesses, it is just pushing you so quickly to think about, it's almost to the point where you say, okay, we have to rip this apart or turn it upside down because we can't do it the way we've always done it. The ground is not as solid as it used to be, so let's relook, let's reinvent. And if that's not, you know, that's got to be part of all of our everyday dialogue.
By the way, we have all had days where dying might have been the preferred option.
But what I find...
Just one last thought.
No, good.
1979, a guy by the name of Ken Olsen, who was at the time running the world's second largest computer manufacturer, made a mistake. He misread consumer behavior. And he said, there is no reason for any individual to own a computer, right? And a few years later, the world's second largest computer manufacturer was history.
So there are lots of lessons in that story, and there are many stories like it. Each of you represent what I would consider established mega corporations that have done an amazing job of being singled out as lumbering dinosaurs, Titanic-like ships, massive, impossible bureaucracies, and yet each one of your organizations is killing it by adapting. So talk to me about adaptation, and let's dispel some myths here, because you're looking at PepsiCo and GroupM and NBCU. You guys are doing, there are little companies out there doing stuff. You guys are big companies acting like little companies in a brilliant way. So now I've said it, you don't have to. Let's give some examples and talk about how this adapt or die paradigm has been taken to heart by your organizations.
I don't know, we're very set in our ways.
That is so not true, Irwin. He might give that appearance. I guess I can jump in on behalf of NBCU because when people look to add, we could use the broadcast business, just one of our biggest assets in the portfolio, but some people, there were a lot of skeptics when Comcast came in and wanted to buy
Really?
NBCUniversal. You might have been one of them, I don't know. But it's been largely one of our biggest success stories. And as Comcast continues to invest in something like the broadcast business, whose death has been predicted for many, many years.
I heard that, yeah.
And from continued investment and reinvention of how we deliver our content, with the sole focus, I would say our adapting really comes from our sole focus and painstaking attention to the consumer and feeding them the content as much as possible, wherever, whenever they want. And I'm quite sure up on this panel we'll get to a little bit of a data discussion, but it's that dedication to continued investment in content. Content dominates the social conversation, and we are building our assets around that.
Yeah, I think for us, we had to make a fundamental decision, because an organization like GroupM, we define ourselves as the intelligent application of scale, right? When we were built, we talked about scale in terms of billings, because the more billings you have, the more effectively you can trade in the market. We had to make a decision 10, 12 years ago that wasn't going to be solely about billings, but about data volume and the technology that supports those data volumes. And those decisions are very difficult for a service business like ours, because it means we had to morph the fundamental business model away from a pure service play to a hybrid one. But there was no choice. Now, many of our competitors didn't do that. Most of them did not. But the disruptors in the space are non-service business model players. Right?
Frank?
Yeah, I mean, I have no easy answer for it. I mean, for PepsiCo, we have 300,000 employees across roughly 190 countries. And you're not going to pull a lever and switch from the dominant model that has worked for whatever number of years to what you think the new model is going to be all in one fell swoop. That won't happen. But it can happen at differing levels in differing places throughout the world. So some of it will be tactical. And so we were seeing some tactical changes. And we have increased our investment in digital pretty much across every major brand in the company significantly. We've increased our focus on mobile significantly. We are thinking across the entire enterprise about how e-commerce can become a more central part of what we do and how we deliver an experience, driving people even online, offline. So on a tactical level, I think you'll see a lot of that happen throughout most of the regions. Then there's a strategic level. You'll have fewer of our brands that do that. There'll be some strategic shifts in how we think about content and distribution and how we deliver that and how we measure that, and even some of the goals that we might have around content and distribution. So those will be some shifts you'll see. But the most difficult one is structural.
Right.
And structural and cultural, I think, and that one's going to take a lot more time, because if you're going to become an adaptive organization, move like a startup in a way, but have the massive infrastructure of a Fortune 100 company, there are principles that are absolutely counterintuitive for a large organization, like embracing uncertainty. That's counterintuitive for a large organization, because large organizations manage risk. That's what they pretty much do. And so that's probably the toughest shift, figuring out structurally and culturally, how do you start to take on some of those principles from the lean startup movement and pull that into a large corporation.
So you said a couple things that are so critical to this conversation. You're looking at data, you're looking at e-commerce or T-commerce, and you're looking at mobile. All of that comes together from a traditional wholesaler. So what do you expect from Irwin, and what do you expect from Linda as a marketer? What do you need back in order to help you realize those goals? You want velocity at retail. You want people to use your products. You want people aware, but you also need the instant gratification of a whole generation of people who are fully connected. What What are the things you most need?
Well, that's a really tough question. Look, I guess more is a process. There's a certain process that I need. And we go through this, I think, in large part. The first part of it for me is just, having an agnostic view of what is happening with the consumer. What are they using? What's really motivating them to purchase? What are the kind of communications that take our communications from awareness to putting it in long-term memory and triggering a reaction? What are the things that make them want to buy something at a premium price? Just agnostic view of that piece. The second thing is, and I think one of the more obvious things right now is just getting deeper in understanding how mobile works and how that can transform not only the way we communicate, but the way that we sell. For mobile, the big unlock for us at least is that, finally at the shelf, at the point of decision, there's the opportunity to communicate. And that's, that line between, traditional media and actual, the driving of a purchase decision right there at that moment is gonna be, I think, a fertile ground for companies and for us to collaborate together. And then finally, data. Data that is not only real time, but predictive. That would help us tremendously. And I think all these conversations are happening, but we're at the beginning of that journey, all of us, I think. And we're learning together, and I think Linda and Irwin are among the more adventurous in terms of pushing toward those new areas. So.
And I think it's a fascinating time right now as we're living in this world of convergence. And if you think about what we at our company call the first phase of convergence, which was when content met mobile. So you could say first in your PC, right? And then it started going everywhere, whether it's on the device in your pocket or on your tablet. But now what we think we're experiencing is this second wave of convergence when we look at data. You talk about what I know Frank and his team push us to do all the time is data meeting this currency measurement, right? Trying to find the equilibrium there because currency measurement, particularly in the TV space, challenging. And then having this data meet video content. So what's the influence on how we talk differently about our video content? So a company like ours can talk to Irwin, can talk to Frank and his company about reaching that consumer more directly, quicker in high value inventory, right? High value, because I need to convince him to pay a lot of money for stuff, and he doesn't like to do that. But then when you take the distribution capability, which is a unique capability of our company, and be able to get to that point of purchase or get quicker to that consideration set and activate that high value inventory. So that's what I think is really fascinating right now. When you marry all that together and video content is in the presence of that more informed data, I think that changes the conversation, and it's a conversation that we're all part of.
There's one more element here, and that is, well, let me ask you. The relative importance of brick and mortar shelf space 5 years from today and 10 years from today, vis-a-vis right now. I mean, just think what happened in the disposable diaper category, right? Do people really need to pick up and touch and feel a can of Pepsi? Or can they get it fulfilled some other way? And in that context, when you look at allocation of marketing dollars, trade support, shelf stocking allowance, vis-a-vis paid media, which is what Linda sells and what we do for a living, those ratios have to change quite dramatically. And the value and the role of media changes fundamentally in that context.
You want to comment?
Well, yeah, I agree. I think those ratios.
Give his mic up, and actually mine too, please. Guys, there we go. And Frank's mic also, please.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Yeah, no, I agree. Those ratios will have to change, and they will change. And the most interesting thing about it is that as big as e-commerce is, what's even bigger is driving people from an online transaction or interaction to an offline transaction. And I'm just a big believer that and I love digital. I love the ones and zeros, love it. But
I heard that about you.
But the physical is still going to be critically important. And I learned that a little bit through music, because I remember, if you rewind back, 10 to 15 years, people thought that music became almost a non-social thing. When the first iPod came out, and before that, exactly, it was just the earphones, and it was like, hey, it's my playlist, and it's my, before even playlist, it's my catalog, and I'm enjoying that.
My mixtape.
But it's my mixtape, and then the most fascinating thing happened is that people felt like, I want to have a social interaction. Festivals started picking up. Even before you got to the playlist, and even before you got to the platforms that sat on top of Facebook and the other social networks, people wanted to interact. And I think you're going to see that even in the physical space for purchasing materials, that people still want to actually go out, interact with other people, but it will have an impact on shelf space. Won't be the same. People will go in with much more knowledge. There'll be some real-time interaction that will happen at the shelf, and I think you'll get real-time information about what other activities and services you can get as you're making that purchase decision. So that will transform the retail environment completely. And by the way, we're going down that path very, very quickly, because the retailers are already putting beacons and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi in the stores, right? So that's happening already. And on top of that, you have third parties who are creating apps and starting to map the in-store environment so that GPS in stores is a reality, and that's coming quickly.
Let's switch gears for a second. There is a common theme used by people who want to come after the three of you from the edge of the solar system, assuming that your companies are the central planetary bodies in this little environment we've created. And they will say things like, well, the fact that the data is generated doesn't mean that the client's ready to take it. Oh yeah, well, GroupM, yeah, they've got a trading desk, so blah, 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 blah. Frank, Linda's got astounding data. Irwin is an ability to interpret that data and give it insights and help you with a marketing mix. They got a lot of data. Can you take it in and act on it? I mean, is Pepsi ready to be and I mean you as a proxy for all brands. You get to speak for everybody right now, all brands. You are all ANA 400 advertisers, so I'm not just singling out Pepsi, but are you the brands ready to take the kind of data sets that are generated at NBC and through GroupM's massive analytics tools?
Yeah, I'll reframe the question. I don't think it's a brand issue or a client issue. I think it's an industry ecosystem issue, and whether or not we can digest the large amounts of data that are coming through to any of us. And so can we digest all the data sets? Probably so, but can we leverage it and process it and then use that information in a way that everyone else understands the benefit of it and that they can act upon it? That's the challenge.
That is a challenge.
And then can you go beyond data sets? Can you bring in unstructured data and start to digest? I think we have a long ways to go. And again, I'm speaking generically, not just about PepsiCo,
I'm asking
PepsiCo.
generically. I don't want to single out Pepsi because
I
you hear it all the
think
time.
it varies dramatically by product category.
So talk to me about that.
Well, if you're an automotive, right? I mean, you still don't have perfect data because your dealers sell the cars and don't necessarily tell you who they sold
Right.
it to, but you can piece it together. If you're in the telephony business, you've got a CRM business.
Right.
So you've got massive amounts of data that's actionable. If you're a CPG client, your data isn't quite as practically usable until you aggregate it up with other people's data and third-party data, right? And so there is no one-size-fits-all answer here, but this stuff isn't easy to do, no matter what the context.
I think that's probably the truest thing said. This is not easy to do. So let me ask this question. Each of us would argue that this is a very challenging environment right now. But I don't know when there hasn't been. I was thinking about this particular question, even in the context of your first answer, Irwin, which is like, hey, when adapt or die, when has that not been true? I mean, Darwinian evolution is adapt or die. Misstated, it's survival of the most adaptable. So those of you who are out there are Darwin fans, I just said it right, but I'm taking some liberty, adapt or die. Shorthand, don't quote me. We've never not lived in challenging times. They're always challenging. There's always something that's, there's conflicts around the world. We've got too much taxation. No one likes the administration. You go on for hours blaming other things in the environment. But I think anybody would say that not only is this a challenging time, the landscape is literally, the ground is shaking underneath because things are different.
I think
What's keeping you up at night?
I think our rate of change is desensitizing us to that rate of change. And we just become accustomed to being the hamsters that learn to run on the treadmill a little faster.
That's interesting.
Okay? I mean, there is some of that, right? I think the biggest issue in my mind is we live in a world where a disruptive player can create a narrative that's built around vapor and get valuation metrics that are significantly higher than those of legacy businesses that have shown consistent and sound management performance, right? And there is something in that equation that does in fact keep me up at night a lot, because they can trade in the public markets and they can do things that even a large entity like any of us can't do because we're playing with different valuation metrics.
Yeah, there's no question about that. We have there's a certain imbalance in the forces of the universe, somewhat out of our control. You're right. And the tech valuations, it's interesting how many companies are talking about what they need to do to get a tech valuation and how you're going to have to manipulate your stock to do that. From my perspective, that's table stakes for 2014 and beyond. Right? That's just a fact of life. And so, and and you're right, the pace of change.
It's a fact of life, but that's the one that should really keep us up at night. Not the fact that we have to work a little harder. We get used to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, by the way, that's ever likely to change. We're always going to have to work a little harder. Where I want to, just in the last few minutes that we have, what I'd love to understand is we've got a bunch of people here who are dealing in a world where programmatic is misunderstood. Some people call it a race to the bottom. Some people are talking about extremified marketplaces. Big data is misunderstood. There's too much of it. We just described like all these different ways that one could think about making data actionable. The last few minutes of this, what can people who are here take home from today and say, in the next 3 months, next 6 months, this is strategically how I want to approach? Like, what would your advice be from your particular lens, through your lens, not overarching, like, media company, agency, brand? What's a key takeaway? What's a good place to look? What's a good strategic focus? What's a good tactical focus? What's a good takeaway for these guys?
Yeah, if I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say think mobile first. And that's not to say exclude TV, it's not to say exclude radio. I think those things are still going to be critically important. But I think the mindset shift that has to happen is mobile, for me, becomes the new center of gravity because people have it with them all the time. There's roughly, 5.5 billion mobile subscribers worldwide. Yeah. They're interacting with that phone, hundreds of times a
150
day.
times a day, more or less.
150 times, I guess, is the number. It's at the shelf. They're watching video. They're doing surprising things on it. They're reading long-form articles on the mobile phone, which I thought would not happen, but they're reading that. And so if you think about it that way, the way in which you create content and distribute content shifts significantly if you make mobile first.
Oh, sure.
And then if you believe in the Internet of Things, which I believe in, that's going to be your remote control for that. that mobile device that you have. And so if there's one thing I would do, I would pull mobile to the forefront. And again, not to exclude everything else, but in order to make that shift so that it becomes a priority within the mix, but also in the way you think about interacting with your consumers.
Sure, Linda?
And to Frank's point, in addition to reading long-form articles on mobile, we like to witness, observe, learn of how much they're watching long-form content and quality content on any device. And I would say whether it was the next 3 months, or particularly for our company, which has been the last 3 years, it's the focus of bringing both sides of our big house together, which is the content, which there's this big pile of great content at our company, but then the ability to bring like the pipe to it. So move the content through the pipe to what is a significant number, maybe more soon, of folks, and be able to prove in partnership with Frank and Irwin the value of that content and the ability to reach that customer. We like to say that we're a strategically complete company from a content development and distribution standpoint, and if you were gonna design a media company of the future, it would look a lot like Comcast, NBCUniversal, and we take that responsibility very seriously. And for the next particular 3 months, I would say our #1 priority is advance ad product. So you'll see a menu of opportunities unique to our company that mobilize that data and provide advantage or opportunities for high-value inventory.
Yeah, no question. Comcast NBCU at the moment is by far the most vertically integrated business out there. And that will allow them to do things that their competitors simply won't be in a position to do. Coming back to the programmatic issue, I gotta say, I don't like the word. I don't know what it means, and I'm in the middle of it.
It means a lot of different things to a lot of people.
And, you know, I think, I don't quote Marissa Myers often, but she did say that the opposite of programmatic isn't premium.
Is not.
Is not premium.
Right, I agree with
the
that.
The opposite of programmatic is manual, right?
Right.
And so in that context, I mean, we began workflow automation in the early 70s. We have a system, even in the legacy media. I mean, when we do network deals, billions of dollars go through that funnel in days. There is no mechanical friction there. The process is highly automated. It's very, very refined. As data becomes more granular, more and more of the analytics have to be performed systemically, right? So that's one aspect. The second aspect is, starting in the mid-90s, when we started to switch on television from program data to respondent level data, we became a systemic operation. We shifted our focus to selecting individual programs because they were a surrogate to specific audiences.
Yeah, proxy for an audience, right?
They were a proxy. We went directly to the audience, and we began to model that. Now, the transaction unit remained the 30-second spot in a program, but the analytics behind it shifted to audience-based analytics, right? Interestingly enough, in the digital space, that transition is still happening.
Yes.
And there is no question in my mind that there is going to be far more focus on specific audiences. Now, that is not to say that context is unimportant. It just becomes one of the weighting factors in the ultimate decision. But as you move more and more to audience-based selection and decisions, you have to become much more systemic. Now, if you call that programmatic, then yes, it's certainly going to take off.
Wow, well, that is a better last word than I could imagine personally saying. Let us give it up for our 3 panelists. Guys are unbelievable, thank you. Frank Cooper, Linda Yaccarino, Irwin Gotlieb, outstanding.